a physician's office, but we're also asking about sleep cycles. And for women, menstrual cycles, energy levels, pain in the body, psycho-emotional components. And the idea is not to hang a diagnosis on one little, oh, he said his back hurts. It's got to be this. But how do all of these checks add up in these different boxes? And that's a starting point. We still want to look at some symptoms. We don't ignore those. But the idea is if I build you up as a whole, I believe the expression is rising tide raises all ships. If we make your body function better, those little parts that may be screaming out have an easier time to start repairing themselves, and then we can give them some attention too.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to today's interview. We're going to have a very fascinating conversation with Dr. Tom Ingegno, who is here with me. He has been in practice on the ground helping people one-on-one with their health for many years. He's written a book on cupping, is into traditional Chinese medicine, Eastern medicine, and all things that are able to help the body work a lot better. So welcome to the show today, and let's get into it.
All right. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, I'm sure everyone is interested to hear what you have to say. Now, how did you get your start in the natural medicine side?
Yeah, so I wanted to be a physician, like a lot of people growing up, doctor, lawyer, banker, something like that. And I always wanted to help people. And my grandfather was a pharmacist. And one day he was counting out pills. This back before they had machines doing all of it. And he's counting them out for somebody that, was basically a day laborer, might have made $50 a day. And he goes, these pills are $5 a piece. He's got to take 3 of them a day for the rest of his life. That kind of stuck with me. And he looked at me and he said, oh, there's got to be a better way. And I'm looking to you to find it. When I was pre-med in college, through a random event, a series of events that I would call serendipitous, I received a postcard in the mail over the winter break for an acupuncture college. And 2 weeks later, I was enrolled and never looked back. And since 2001, I've been treating and, running a private practice for acupuncture and East Asian medicine.
Now, as far as the ability to address multiple issues on a holistic basis, what have you found to be the most effective things that kind of cover most bases foundationally for most people?
That's a great question because, one, you nailed it on the head. When we pull back and we're looking at things from a holistic viewpoint, we don't want to just divvy up the body into little parts. And we want to say, what's happening here? How is that connected to something that may be happening in another area? And one of the things that's great about traditional practices, not just even East Asian medicine, is that this view tends to look at things as that whole and tries to improve function across the systems. With that, when we talk about acupuncture from a Western standpoint, or a lot of these traditional practices, we're seeing a reduction in systemic inflammation, right? So we know that inflammation leads to disease. Stress can cause inflammation. And these two things are probably the biggest two avenues that we see improvement with acupuncture. The stress reduction and the increased circulation happens through regulation of the autonomic nervous system, fight or flight, rest and digest. After about 10, 15 minutes, a lot of these traditional practices will switch you into that rest and digest mode. You get better blood flow. You're less stressed out. Your brain waves are making patterns that are mirroring meditative brain waves. So that alpha delta, alpha theta brainwave switching back and forth, which allows the body to kind of start taking care of itself.
Now, as far as diagnosing someone, what's your most effective way to really tell where they're coming from on a root cause basis rather than going into their genetics?
It's pretty interesting because there are several pillars in East Asian medicine that we talk about. The biggest one that everyone sees is us taking the pulse, right? So we have 12 channels on the body, and like frets on a guitar, we have 3 positions on each wrist. So we have an upper level and a deeper level, and that's 6 on each side, 1 for each one of those 12. And combining that, which one's the strongest and the weakest, with a bunch of random adjectives that all have individual meanings, we start to look to see which pattern is most likely somebody. On top of that, we're asking questions like you would at a regular physician's office, but we're also asking about sleep cycles. And for women, menstrual cycles, energy levels, pain in the body, psycho-emotional components. And the idea is not to hang a diagnosis on one little, oh, he said his back hurts. It's got to be this. But how do all of these checks add up in these different boxes? And that's a starting point. We still want to look at some symptoms. We don't ignore those. But the idea is if I build you up as a whole, I believe the expression is rising tide raises all ships. If we make your body function better, those little parts that may be screaming out have an easier time to start repairing themselves, and then we can give them some attention too.
How long did it take to get really good at reading the pulse?
I'll let you know in another 20 something years, man. Pulse is so nuanced. We have some people that I would call enlightened masters in our field. And I've heard them say things like, oh, when this person was 6, this happened.
Right.
I'm not there yet. Certainly what we're trying to do is get a general indication and put that together with other things, because palpatory assessment, which pulse taking is one of those things, is part and parcel of the whole system, where we can check the channels, check points on the channels, check things that relate to other areas. We press that and we'll get feedback that way too. So I like to use everything at my discretion. I don't want to just lean on pulse taking because it is very nuanced.
Now, as far as people, what they're consuming for food and hydration and all those kind of things, what do you suggest for the best practice? Like, say, first thing in the morning, what's really important to get in the body?
First thing in the morning, water. I think people overlook that. Certainly when I'm dragging out of bed and trying to get 2 kids out to school, the first thing I want is a cup of coffee. But getting some hydration going first is probably the most important thing you can do. I would lean on the water. Some people like to put lemon in it. Some people like a cup of warm water. However you like it, do that before you drink your coffee. I normally do that to help me get down my handful of supplements too as well.
Is there a timing from the time you wake up till you should really be getting like the proteins and things like that into your system?
Not so much from an East Asian medicine standpoint. We want to have breakfast in the morning. Between 7 and 9 is normally the window that they say based on where the energy is in the channels. But some people that doesn't work for. I know some people that like to do intermittent fasting and they might hold off until the early afternoon. Personally, for me, I played with that for a long time. I do enjoy intermittent fasting. It seems to be, if you're going to eat heavier foods, those are your proteins, having them a little bit earlier in the day and then switching to something lighter, veggies and carbs later in the day. It's a little bit easier to help make you go to sleep, but also isn't leaving something heavy in your stomach trying to digest late at night.
Yeah, so it's important not to have, for your rest and digest and repair, you don't want to have a big load to process.
Yeah, I mean, the T-bone steak at 11 p.m. is probably not your best friend, although that's very tempting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. As far as diuretics, things that are like coffee, alcohol, nicotine, diuretic teas, what are your thoughts around that as far as the losing of the fluids?
It is a thing. It's funny when you look at the research, some people say the diuretic effect of coffee is not as strong as the amount of water that you're actually getting with the coffee. But that being said, same way with alcohol. If you're going to have a cup of coffee, make sure you have a glass of water with it. I like to counterbalance, 1 for 1 there. That being said, I do drink a lot of herbal teas and I am a big fan of green tea. I know there is a diuretic effect mildly with that. And, I would have teachers that would be drinking the same tea leaves, just keep adding hot water over them. I'm sure by their time they're filling that mug up, the 10th, 12th time, there's trace amounts of caffeine or anything that would be diuretic. And I know they're hydrating. So make sure you keep adding in if you are drinking diuretics. I don't necessarily avoid them, but I also am not doing things like, corn silk tea just to have the diuretic effect. I want to stay hydrated.
I tend to lean away from diuretics personally, just from my own experience. And I ran into this very unusual practice, which I've been doing for the last couple of years, which is adding a significant amount of unrefined sea salt to the water I drink so that it's melted in. It's 5 grams a liter.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. What I noticed was that, and I started doing that when I was 64 years old. I only did it because I found out that a guy had done it for 20 years with a whole bunch of people and noted a lot of things. And one of the things that it did is started to support my body's ability to produce a lot more blood.
Yeah.
In volume. And all of a sudden, within a month of having this greater volume of blood, my blood pressure, which I was very proud of at 115/65, went up to 180/120 for about 4 months.
Wow.
Resting. And everybody would normally freak out at that, but I didn't, because I was told at my age, that particular time, that my cardiovascular system was stiffened. And I wouldn't have known it if I hadn't done the salt water. And so it was at 180/120 for 4 months, and then it slowly dropped down to back to normal levels, like 135/90 within 7-8 months. And then it just stayed there ongoing and would go even lower than that, drinking the same amount of salt water. It tapped me into this hydration thing, that hydration is the quality of the fluid rather than the amount of fluid.
Yeah.
And it brought the quality way up. And I went through all of these very intense, very good. It made me feel better and better and better, but intense liquid bowel movements for like 3 months.
It's kind of clearing everything out. Yeah.
Well, it was clearing like dirty blood.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen anything like that done?
It's interesting. One thing I want to point out is you're dead on. This is not table salt, right? This is sea salt, right?
Yeah,
so it's not iodized salt. And two, there is kind of, when you start increasing salt, even trace minerals, even if you do a hydration formula, which will have some salt in it too, a lot of people report like loose stools while they're getting used to it. And it's how your body's processing that fluid and keeping it in the system. But it's also going to be flushing away a lot more because a lot of people are walking around thinking that having a bowel movement, every 3 days is normal. It's kind of insane too. So yes, we don't want to have liquid diarrhea daily, but there is a clearing out that does happen, and it can be quite therapeutic.
I went through like the last 20 years. I've visited pretty much every imaginable holistic approach to the human body and didn't just try them. I literally did them for periods of time. Remember, I went to I'm not sure how he would title himself. He's a master of Eastern medicine, Chinaman, very tall Chinaman. And he took my pulse and he said to me, "You have one of the fastest pulses I have ever felt."
Wow.
This is going back like 7-8 years now. Yeah. I said, "No, my BPM is like 60. He goes, "I'm not talking about that." He says, "It's way too fast. It's ramping up." He said, "It's literally the fastest I felt." He said, "What's your lifestyle?" And I said, well, I told him what I do. In the morning, I usually fast till noon and I eat, certain foods, and I'm slim and trim and got tons of energy. He goes, "Yeah, okay. So you're burning your body out." He said, "When I say fast, it's way over the top. You're running on spinal cord fluid and bone marrow, and you're burning your body out." He said, "Fasting till noon is going to take you out. You have lots of energy, but that's not real good energy." So he got me to shift my clock. He said, "All I want you to do is when you wake up in the morning, I want you to have a good, like you said, between 7 and 9, a good amount of protein, like a good solid breakfast, and then lighten it up later on in the day." And it really made a difference to my body. I went like through 2 weeks of kind of the slump, and then I came out of that.
Yeah.
Once I got used to it. Yeah. So it's great advice on the food.
It's pretty interesting when I hear somebody talking about classical concepts and then they translate them a little bit for you. So what he was talking about is this term we call essence. Jing is the Chinese term for it, right? And they say that's the bone marrow. That's how long you have on the planet, right? He's talking about the quality of the pulse, not beats per minute, as you said. And sometimes when we translate that word, we use the word hurried. So it's not that it's fast as far as beats per minute, but the idea is that it seems to be faster than your body type should have, right? We also have people that have faster pulses that we say, no, this is sluggish. And it indicates something that's going on internally, not necessarily chronologically. And it's pretty interesting that he picked up on that, because we would say that, like, yes, adding something heavy, giving your body the fuel it needs, doesn't deplete the essence as much, right? Now I'm burning the substance that I'm taking in rather than, as the expression goes, burning the candle at both ends.
Right. Yeah, you said, your body had just finished working all night doing all that repair, and it needs to be rewarded in the morning, and you're not rewarding it.
It's a valid concept, and breaking fast is exactly what we should be doing. And yeah, we can debate about what time that is, and it might be different for various people, but normally in the morning to put something in your system after not eating for a period of time while you're sleeping is not a bad idea.
Yeah. And the intermittent fasting is great for human growth hormone. I've done, I think people do a lot of that. They'll like 16 hours a day and eat for 8 hours, that kind of thing, which is, I just had to adjust my clock to make sure that when I woke up, that's when it was, really getting into it made a big difference. He said it was burning out my sexual energy as well.
This is all kidney essence is what we would call this. Yeah.
Jing. Yeah.
Jing. Yes.
They're the three, like, what is it? The three is the
Jing, Qi, and Shen.
Shen. Yeah. Yeah. Jing is the amount of battery you got left, right?
Yeah. It is the life expectancy, if you will. It's how long you're given. And that wanes as we age, right? There's some weird Qigong Taoist practices to try and cultivate that, but it's very hard to do. So the idea is to monitor, and live a life where we're not stressing that too much. And that allow us to maximize the time on the planet and our overall health.
Our quality of life. It's a matter of,
absolutely.
My main key performance indicator, call it the KPI, whatever, is that we should actually be getting healthier every day because we are getting older, but we should not be aging per se. If we're getting older and we're doing something long enough and getting better and better at it, we should actually become healthier. And if we're not, if we're on the trajectory with everyone else in the world that is around us, that we're very used to seeing them deteriorate and the bottom falling out when they get into their 80s, and usually the life expectancy right now is 75 to 85 years old.
Yeah.
People get to 85 being, oh, they're really old, but that's only really old if they haven't been doing the right thing for that long.
And we're starting to see a shift. We see it on the internet. And I just read something the other day. They're studying a 94-year-old who does, it was something like 18 miles on a rowing machine daily. And he's the cardiovascular fitness of a teenager. And clearly sharp mind, very physically capable. And this is a time when we think that people should be walking with some kind of aid and, not sharp. Mm-hmm. And surely if you do it right, and I'm not saying you got to go out there and row 18 miles every day, you got to fit your lifestyle and how you're built. But yeah, you can have a long, robust life.
You mentioned you wrote the book on cupping, so you obviously have a great knowledge of that.
Yeah.
What's the reason, the big why?
The big why is a reduction of inflammation, increasing circulation, right? So we want good quality blood moving through the body. A lot of the individual or classical applications of cupping, and it's interesting because, we have references of cupping going back in China almost as long as acupuncture, but it's interesting that physicians in China, it was around 350 AD where they were like, yeah, no, we should be doing that too. It was considered a folk remedy. Do it at home. And that's where it exists throughout Europe, throughout Africa, throughout most of Asia, even in South America. And it's been that way for thousands of years, probably longer than acupuncture itself. And it's applied with the idea of getting that blood moving, right? So if we look at it from a Western standpoint, we're creating a space, a gap between the skin and the fascia and the muscles to allow circulation through and actually draw blood through the tissue. But within that, what it has as a long-term effect is that increased circulation. So we know when we're using it for pain, right? One of the reasons we have pain is we're not getting blood flowing through that muscle and restoring that function. And this really strongly does that. And the results are so good and so profound that we have studies, especially a few systematic reviews done in the last, 5 to 10 years that, yeah, it definitely works for low back pain. Yes, it definitely works for neck pain. And we have anecdotal history going back for respiratory disorders, infections, digestive disorders, and psycho-emotional disorders as well. The goal with the book was to teach people how to do this safely at home, right? In my clinic, we use fire cupping, which is the classic where we use fire to burn the oxygen out of the cups and create the vacuum that pulls. But there's so many modern day devices, silicone cups that you just literally press out, hand pumps that take the air out of the cup, even mechanical ones that you press a button and it does it for you. So why not restore, now that we've removed the fire and no one's going to burn their house down, to that being a home remedy that you can lean on, $20 kit will last you a lifetime.
Yeah, so like a moxibustion? Is that
so moxibustion is different. I'm actually, believe it or not, in 2 days, I'm giving a lecture to the Department of Defense hospital system, so Walter Reed and all those, on moxibustion. Now, moxibustion is amazing. That's burning an herb on or near the surface of the skin. Specifically, modern day times, we're talking about mugwort. And mugwort has a body of evidence. Mugwort is a weed that grows everywhere on the planet. It has antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial properties, so much so that a physician in the 70s made an anti-malarial out of it. That in 2015 or 2016, she received the Nobel Prize in Medicine for this drug and saving over 70,000 people in Thailand. It's an amazing thing that we know that when we burn it on or near the skin, we're talking about blood flow. It increases circulation 6 times the normal amount. It'll open up those blood vessels. So if we have an injury and we burn it on or near it, if we have some issues internally, we can burn it on the abdomen, the low back, and really help get fresh blood in, old stagnant blood out. That's the magic recipe for healing.
As far as you can really do it anywhere in the body, can you do cupping anywhere at all?
There's a general rule of thumb is you need a flat area, a wider flat area.
Mhm.
So modern day cups, they have a lot smaller cups. With the silicone, it will conform to the body. Torso, back, chest, abdomen, bigger parts of the legs tend to lend themselves best to it. Traditional systems like hijama, which is Islamic in tradition, they will do cupping on the head, but you need a head like mine, not like yours.
Right.
So you can do it almost anywhere on the body. It's a lot easier on the bigger areas.
I've had it done on my back, and I noticed that there was lots of what looked like bruising that came
Yeah.
up. It took quite a while to go away. Does the bruising eventually go away if you do it long enough?
This is the interesting debate about that, right? The cupping marks themselves don't necessarily mean you're getting better results. You'll see charts online where they're like, oh, if it's this dark, it means it's blood stagnation. If it's this color, it means this. If it's that. So it comes down to a lot of different variables. One is how vascular is that tissue? So if you're doing it on the hips, maybe there's not a lot of blood flow, especially if somebody's a bit larger there. Two, how healthy are your blood vessels? The idea is here, this suction is pulling on those vessels, and those smaller capillaries will rupture. If you have very good blood vessels, you may not bruise as easily. You might just not be a bruiser. It doesn't mean you won't get the effect, because the effect comes from creating the space.
Right.
And watching a lecture of a relatively well-known practitioner who studied for a long time in China, he said that in the 80s when he was there, they had these alongside of practitioners that would have some people that were a little bit more snake oil salesmen, and they'd want you to come back. So what they do is they vigorously rub the area before they put the cup on, already rupturing some of those capillaries, and you would get this purple mark that looked horrible, and they go, oh, you're real sick. I got to get you back, every week. What you might see is if your overall health improves and your blood vessels improve, you may not get as dark. If you have good circulation through that area and the blood's moving well, the marks might not be as dark. So if you are getting treated, yes, you can say that over time the marks will be less dark, but it's not the indication of whether or not the treatment was successful.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting, when I went to this doctor, he's just outside of LA, told me about, the importance of eating early in the morning with the fast ramped up pulse. I went there with a friend of mine, and that friend had a lot of health issues. And he went through a whole series of diagnoses to determine what herbal teas that he was going to make, as he actually made these custom things right at his place. You'd have to come back 4 or 5 hours later and pick them up. And he did a custom thing. And I thought, oh man, I can't wait to find out, the stuff that I need. And he's going to give me the stuff and everything's great. And so, because he gave my friend quite a various amount. And when he did this diagnosis of me, he said, the only thing you've got is this problem when you're eating and you're eating up your energy. He said, I cannot detect any sickness in your body at all. And he said, you don't need anything from me at all. Like not even, I said, not even one, like not even something that you could.
Yeah.
Really? I felt like I was getting left out.
That's very savvy, and I like to hear those kind of things. One, it means that you're on the right track, and two, that somebody's not just trying to sell you something. 80%, 90%, we can even call it that, of Americans probably need some intervention, some kind of help. Within that, there is a small community that is doing what they should be doing, and they're willing to adjust their lifestyle. If we had these lifestyle changes early on, or if we knew what to do and we could sidestep a lot of things, you would see not just herbal formulas be less frequently used, but you see a lot of these interventions, drugs, surgery, all of them start to go down. Our lifestyle gets better. Our quality of life gets better. We need less intervention because our body is designed to take care of itself. It's just when we're acting and when we're living a life that is not fulfilling that, that's when we start to see the problems and we veer off course. And that's where we get the laundry list of symptoms. Now, yes, there's weird infections, there's genetic variables. That's not everybody. But for most people, let's say the average person, the outcome that we have is related to a bunch of small factors that we do have control over.
Right. Cool. This guy also said that if you take an herbal medicine that your body doesn't need, he said a lot of them are actually harmful to you if you don't need them.
And that's true too. That's a very classical statement, right? We all want to take more supplements and do things to get better and better, but it is adding something to a system that if it's pretty balanced, you're just going to throw off balance in the other direction, right?
Yeah, very interesting. Now, what do you recommend for people to do at home that they could actually do a therapy, maybe to repair injuries or to open up meridians?
Yeah,
Is there
yeah.
things that people can do that you suggest at home?
So, of course, I'm going to say cupping because I wrote a damn book on cupping. But really, I'm a huge fan of Qigong and meditation. And Qigong is, for those who don't know, it's movement, it's mild movement with breathing exercises. So it's something that anybody can do, and you can adapt that to be sitting or standing or however you want to do it. And there's various exercises that you can find plenty of free resources for. There's lots of little communities. And Qigong often gets kind of put together with Tai Chi, right? So we hear of Tai Chi, and Tai Chi is the martial component of this, but getting your movements with exercise. What's happening here is, one, you're doing breath work, right? We're taking slower, deeper breaths. We're getting more oxygen into the system, more CO2 out, but we're also mildly stretching and opening joints when we do them, right? So these smaller movements help lubricate the joints, loosen up the muscles, the fascia, the tendons, and keep you moving more. So these mild things tend to work better when somebody's stiff and injured, right? It's not like, let's just get out there and start deadlifting again. Let's do some mild exercises, warm the area up. And we see people that do this, and sometimes in clinic we'll show people one or two exercises and say, just do these two, a couple minutes a day. Some of that's for compliance, right? We want to make sure people are going to do what we say. And two, because sometimes that's all it takes. It just takes a gentle little nudge.
I ran into a thing that I'd like to sort of run past you for a minute.
Sure.
It was back in November of 2017, and it comes from the classical Chinese world. It seemed unorthodox at the time and radical, but it's actually not at all. And I just watched this video, and it was explained the very basics of it, because, you know, that I had no knowledge of this at all. And I started to do this, and it was a self-healing practice. And it involves stimulation of the skin, and you do it in a gradual basis. And wherever you do it on your body, it does remarkably deep work. I'll give you an example. I had a really bad injury when I was 21 years old on my left knee, and it was crushed I worked in the oil rigs right in the field for 17 years. And a firewall fell off a building accidentally, and it weighed about 800 pounds. I thought I could stop it from coming at me. I didn't even slow it down. I scrambled to get away from it, and it was like 8 feet above my head. It came over, and it landed on the side of my knee, and it crushed my knee really badly. It didn't get the rest of my body, but it damaged my knee so much that it took months to be able to walk and run properly. It didn't break anything, but it was this blunt trauma injury. And then for 39 years, from 21 years old till 60, I couldn't do anything that would twist my knee.
Yeah.
And my knee would blow up like a basketball and hurt. And it was aching, like it would just ache and ache and ache all the time. If I went to an auditorium, I couldn't sit for 20 minutes without major pain coming on because I couldn't put my legs straight.
Yeah.
And it would hurt and hurt, like really hurt right after leave. And so I thought, I'll try it on my knee, because it was more around meridians. The video I watched, it was how to open up heart and lungs and liver and gallbladder and spleen and pancreas and kidneys and all that behind the knees and on the elbows.
Yeah. Is this a slapping that you're talking about? Yeah,
it is. And so this is actually something that I kind of did a little bit of a deep dive, but I always like to get people's opinion, especially someone like yourself who's in this world, and you've seen so many things happen. I found out you can use your hand.
Yeah.
But I got this hand, a silicone hand.
This is sold for the same thing. And
right, exactly, yeah.
I have another one somewhere it's reeds tied together.
So this one, if you can see, can you see that okay?
Oh, it's coming in. Yeah. Just with your hand, yeah.
I did it for 5 minutes. Now, I did this video a year after I had already done it, and was asking about the cupping, like, do you keep getting the bruising? Well, you can see how hard I'm going.
Yeah.
I had done exactly that treatment on the same knee the year before, and it looked like this.
All hell, yeah.
Right, that's what came out. And there's some different angle shots. And then this is 30 minutes later. It broke up quite a bit. And then that's like 6 hours later. And it drained all the way up to my hip and all the way down to my ankle. And my knee was totally healed. I can do anything with my knee I want to. I can go skiing. I can twist it. I have never had pain in my knee since. Have you ever seen any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so, and maybe in the back of my head, East Asian medicine was always where I was going. I remember watching some shows growing up, and I saw a guy in Taiwan that, people would go to. And I think he went from Taiwan to Australia or something. And he was hitting people with martial arts instructor, and he was hitting people with two small pieces of bamboo.
Mm-hmm.
And, he had all these Australian patients that he was interviewing, and they would come out and say, I couldn't walk before this guy. He's hitting them not to break something, but with some decent force over areas that were affected. And in a very similar way, that color comes up, that dark blood that's, they'll say, oh, this is stagnant blood. You got to move it, right? Mm-hmm. And herbal formulas can do that, but also physical work can do that. And I think that's a difference maybe in mindset in Asia as opposed to maybe the rest of the world, right? Body work, massage, it's not a relaxing spa experience per se, right? We're going to do something to get a physical outcome, and that may not be pleasant. But, as you can attest, it's not miserable. It's not hard. It looks pretty rough. But it does have a pretty profound effect. And as you described it, that blood stagnation got broken up. You did that mechanically and got it to drain. And that's amazing, because that is something that when we hear stories about this, when it's presented, because there's been some cases in Asia, and these are the ones they get covered, where somebody did it the wrong way. Mm-hmm. Somebody did it to a child, but it's mishandling it. There's plenty of deaths from aspirin. No one talks about those. But when we see something that might be out of mainstream, rather than trying to understand it, we say, well, that's weird. And of course it's dangerous. But yeah, this is something that I actually learned after I was out of acupuncture school. I learned this from somebody who was teaching Qigong, believe it or not. So It made sense. He described it as meridian massage, and it, starts with,
right.
And then when you want to do it to treat something, you can work a certain area and you work the according channels and see what comes up. And you are looking for that release, that dark blood.
But what I've done since then, once I saw that happen with my knee, that was back in 2018 when that was May 2018. I started working through my whole entire body doing that. You have to stay on only that one area for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And if there's nothing wrong at all in that area, absolutely nothing happens.
It happens.
A little tiny bit of stinging for about a few seconds, that goes away, and then nothing happens. I can go most places in my body as hard as I want. No bruising, no dark blood, no nothing comes up. And then I know that it's finished. And it has profoundly changed my body's ability, both of my knees, because I had knee and shoulder injuries. And the worse the injury, the more came up. And now nothing.
Nothing. Yeah.
I love this whole seeing is believing, because you're working in the physical world all the time with people, and you can't fake the results, right? And this one, what I found, opens up everything so that everything else now works 10 times better, whether it's a supplement you're going to take or an exercise, or if you do acupuncture. Now the channels are so open.
Yeah.
Everything works incredibly well. My body's back to around a 21-year-old physical, structural, for mobility, agility, flexibility. And I'm not even into any intense practices, just this one thing that allowed my body to release all this stuff. So we're really interested in the fact that you wrote the cupping book, because I know the cupping definitely hasn't.
Yeah, the methodology is different, but the effect can be similar. Yeah.
Right. And also gua sha.
Yeah, gua sha is one that I'm very happy that it's getting some mainstream attention. Mm-hmm. One of the issues I have with it is that they're using it for cosmetics. And it's not that it can't be, but gua sha literally means scraping sand. And the idea here is I should be applying enough friction to feel the grittiness of the fascia. And in areas that you need it, as you're scraping, you feel under, almost like sandpaper. And you're getting better. One, when the area stops bruising as much, those little petechia, those little purplish dots don't happen as much. Right. But also when you slide the tool, no grit. Why? Because now the fascia is relaxed. We've got good circulation through, whether it's lymphatic, whether it's cardiovascular, blood flow. It's better in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I did actually hear about the death thing that happened with this particular slapping. What happened is the gentleman who was doing that, he wasn't actually doing the treatments. He was just showing people how to do it. he had successfully eliminated type 1 diabetes out of a lot of adult people in his lifetime, showing them these things, which is like
Impossible.
You can't stop type 1. That's a dead pancreas. And what he had to do for that, he's not a doctor, so he couldn't do the treatments. He would get 3 people on an 8-hour shift, and it took 2 weeks where the person had to go off insulin 100%. You tell a type 1 diabetes person to go off insulin, you got to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And they're doing blood tests and fasting and eating food at a certain time and slapping and stretching and all this stuff that they had to do. And then within 2 weeks, the pancreas would fire up again. But it's a super intense thing to do. And it's over the top. So what happened is a young couple and the grandmother brought their 6-year-old boy to one of the workshops. And the boy had multiple health issues, but one of them was type 1 diabetic. Well, don't do that with a 6-year-old because a 6-year-old cannot consent.
Yeah, cannot. Yeah, and they can't give you feedback in a way that you need. Yeah.
But he allowed him to do it, and they were 8 days in, and your body's got to go through all this stuff, like getting rid of all this terrible garbage out of the system to get it restarted, and no insulin the whole time. At the end of the workshop, the parents went to a hotel with the grandmother to continue the treatments, and the gentleman stayed on as well, just to sort of be there as an advisor. And he had gone over for dinner with the people leaving the workshop, the general group. When he got back to the hotel, ambulances were there and police, and the parents had made some mistake, I don't know, an accident, and the child had got into a diabetic shock or an insulin shock and diabetic coma and had a heart attack and died. And it had nothing to do with his slapping. It had to do with the insulin. But because it was tied into the slapping therapy, then it was like, the slapping.
Yeah, it must have been that. Yeah.
So immediately, the young couple was arrested. The grandmother was arrested because they're the adults responsible for this child. And they were put in jail. They kept trying to put the blame away from themselves because now they've lost their son. And a year later, they arrested this gentleman. They extradited him back to Australia, to Sydney, and they charged him with manslaughter. And he ended up getting a 10-year sentence over that.
Wow.
And they let the parents and the grandmother out of jail. And he just won his appeal just last year. He won an appeal on that to prove medically that he had not.
He had nothing to do with that. Yeah.
That's right. And so what a deal, though.
And here I am just reading the headline going, wow, I don't want to hear more about that. They're going to bury that technique.
Right.
It's very interesting.
And the technique, it turns out over 1 million people in the world, which is 1 million people is 1/80th of 1%. So it was nobody. Right. But he had gone all over the world and taught people this one. And it's sort of like the deepest foundational stuff that I've ever found that I think would be really interesting for someone like yourself to look at and incorporate, because there really could be a movement around this where your patients would do so much better, faster. All of our goal is to have people not to need us, right?
Exactly.
You help them to get to that place, and you have more and more patients. So many people, like there's an endless number of people who can come to a person's practice to be helped. It's sort of a psychological barrier. It's like the cupping. People like that, you go, bruising is bad and pain is bad. Well, it's bad and if you're injured, but it's not if you're being healed. And I've just seen profound results with the Eastern Asian, particularly, whether it's even China or India with the Ayurvedic medicines, and those things have been so much more powerful rather than invasive things with all the pharmaceuticals and the things that are, like you mentioned, the cost of the pharmaceuticals alone, and they're only Band-Aids. They're not really getting to the point.
Yeah. For me, it's very exciting to have started out in a field when, even though it was popular, I was still getting, hey, the doctor told me not to come back because you're going to give me hepatitis with the needles. And I go, look, 20 years before I became an acupuncturist, no one was reusing needles. What are you talking about? And now we have a body of evidence where, and I'm not knocking chiropractic or physical therapy here, we have more studies showing the effects of acupuncture and demonstrating them than physical therapy and chiropractic put together. And in most of these studies, we outperform what they call standard of care. So if you're talking about pain relief and it's an NSAID or physical therapy, well, acupuncture, these allied therapies, cupping, gua sha, they can all outperform most of what you would think is the quote unquote modern Western model. And that's super exciting for me. How did they know this 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago?
Right. Oh, yeah. This is thousands of years old, isn't it?
Absolutely.
This gentleman, it was really interesting. His little story is a very short story. He made millions of dollars in his life as an author. And he wanted to go and find out what the truth is when it comes to what a person can do for themselves. And so this guy met him and said, you look like you were some kind of a Qigong master in a past lifetime, or whatever.
Yeah.
And he said, if you really want to know what's going on, don't drive around, don't use your money, don't fly, just get a good quality backpack with good shoulder straps and walk. Mm-hmm. Go into the small towns in the back of China and just fit into this society. He knew Mandarin, of course. And so just go and just connect and find out who has the real goods. And so he set a bar really high. He just wanted to have it to be free, no skill required, heals everything at once. I mean, that's a pretty tall order.
Yeah, it is a tall order, yeah.
Where you could actually do it yourself. And after many years, he came back with these two things, just a slapping and a stretching thing. And then he had a TV show for about 3 years in China doing these treatments and showing people like who were in their 70s and 80s who couldn't get out of a chair, couldn't walk up a set of stairs, within 1 week, able to move around.
Up and moving, yeah.
A couple of very basic treatments. He's the one who traveled the world and showed all the people. He's the one who went to jail,
Yeah.
Like, man, to be put in prison for this kind of thing, I don't think it's over popular to have something out there that could really work for somebody at home.
Well, I mean, if you look at the people that have other interests, drug companies, hospital systems, these kind of things, they start to fall apart when you just take away their supply chain.
Right. Although I think their industry will always be there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's more of a matter of greed in that case, though. Like, we want to make sure that ours is the only method.
Yeah, exactly.
And certainly we hear stories of this and we have anecdotal evidence. And why aren't there studies? Well, because no one's going to fund them. Right. Why? I'm not going to fund something that somebody could do for free. Why? There's no reason for me to prove that something like that works.
Right. I read a book. Have you ever heard of a book called Outwitting the Devil?
I've heard the title. I have not read it.
Well, it's an interesting read. It's a short book, actually. It, like on Audible, is only 5.5 hours. So it's a really short
okay.
book. I was told about it a while ago. And when I listened to it, I was like, yep, interesting. It talks about 5 fears, like the fear of poverty, fear of illness, fear of criticism, fear of old age, and fear of death, and how that controls 98% of society.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and 2% have learned to purge those fears, and they're willing to do things themselves to take responsibility for themselves. And so the industry, the pharmaceutical, medical world will always enjoy that 98%, which is a massive number. And 2% is 160 million people. How many people in your practice have you had go through your office over the last 20 years? Is it like 1,000? How many?
Yeah, definitely more than that. I mean, we're doing well over 6,000 appointments. Clearly not all individual people, they come back a year, so that would be, couldn't even tell you to give you an accurate number there because, some months are slower than others. Some months we have new people coming in. In my head, it's a big number, but compared to 98% of the world's population, it's nothing.
Even 2%, even if you have 160 million people who are serving with the truth and getting them to take action on these things that you've been talking about is just a massive number. It's so many people that we have to serve to get the information to them. And they're waiting for us to show up. So that's the purpose of this whole podcast and these interviews, is to get that information to as many as possible. And I'm not interested in disrupting a system. You can imagine if everybody in the world, the whole entire economy that they built around people being ill would collapse.
Absolutely collapse.
And that's not going to happen because 98% are going to keep going back and doing the same thing that everybody else does. I just like to see individuality. And you've got an individuality world with your practice, which is super cool because you're in an environment where that was not around here 50, 60 years ago.
Absolutely not. No. And a lot of the people that brought it back, whether they came from Asia or they went to Asia, made a lot of sacrifices. A lot of them were in jail for practicing medicine. Some of those first people, some very famous acupuncturists here, and it was only in the 70s, and that's where a lot of the stereotypes came from. And you're going to get hepatitis because they're going to reuse needles and stuff like that. It was all hearsay. And I thought you were going to mention the book, The Secrets of the Fountain of Youth, which is another fun one that I like a lot, where he talks about this old army general that heard of somebody in India that had this way to repair himself. And he's gray, he's walking with a cane, and he sits down on a park bench. And 3 years later, this young, vibrant man comes back and he goes, "Hey, man, I found it." And it's five little exercises, and one of them is literally spinning in a circle.
Right.
you know,
The Tibetan rites, right?
yeah, the Tibetan rites, exactly. Yeah, and lo and behold, there's some good outcome to it. Now, are you going to live forever? Probably not, but
Wow.
you could definitely live a long, vibrant, healthy life without doing something drastic.
That's right. Yeah. And resetting the foundation is a bit of work. Like, going through my body and doing all the slapping and stretching has been interesting. I have about 40% left to go now.
Wow.
Recently, because I went through all these 20 years of studying all these people and really doing them,
Yeah.
trying all these diets. I'm not into diets at all now. I don't have any titles or anything like vegan or carnivore or keto. Those are all like just titles. But have you heard about the Randall cycle?
No, this one's interesting.
Yeah, it has to do with the amount of fat your body wants to have. So your body has a perfect percentage of fat in the lipid membrane of every cell that it wants.
Yeah.
And if you have more fat, regardless of good fats, bad fats, you don't want bad fats, obviously. But even with good fats, if you go over the percentage, whatever percentage more than what your body is actually wanting, blocks insulin delivering glucose into the cell.
Well, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. Yeah.
And you end up with free insulin, free glucose rolling through your system, which is toxic, which then the body has to store in fat.
Yeah.
And it goes into the visceral fat. And so when I found out about this, I thought, okay, I'm going to do an experiment, because I had definitely had too much fat. I wasn't overweight at all, but I had too much fat on my lipid membranes, because I noticed when I took carbs, I would lose my energy. I'd feel bad. So I stopped everything for a period of time. So I didn't have any fat intake. It took a couple of weeks for my body to wash it down enough. And then I just went to really high-end carbs, like the best fruits in the world, and fermented palm tree syrup and sweet potatoes, which are prebiotic, and just cranked it. And I've never seen this. All the lights in the stadium came on.
That's great.
Like way deeper sleep, way more energy during the day, nothing jacked up, no requirement of any stimulants, just go, go, go. And huge endurance, huge stamina, and major brain power. And I mix that with this unrefined salt water, and I've never seen a breakthrough, and personally, ever like this. And then you mentioned breathing, how important breathing is. Now I was watching this really close and tracking it. Month number 7 of doing the salt water alone, I coughed up lungfuls of this white glue every 30 minutes for the whole month. I had no infection, no fever, nothing. It was a wild ride. I thought, and I wasn't sick. And then my lungs were like really good after that. And I thought, okay, I'm done. And about a month went by, and then it started again. I'm like, starting again? And it went for another month. So month number 9 was the same thing. And it hasn't happened since. So adding that in, like what the work you're already doing, I'd be really interested in seeing someone like yourself who's got access on the ground with people and coaching them through, because they do need a coach. Most people are like freaked out if their blood pressure goes up for a while.
And that's rightfully so. That is a scary thing if you don't know the reason. Yeah.
Right. And yet, if you look at a bodybuilder, they're working out all the time. Their veins are bulging out.
Yeah.
Their blood pressure's through the roof when they're exercising. Nothing blows up. But yet everybody is super terrified of these high blood pressure numbers for temporary periods of time. So I think it's just a matter of getting people educated about what is weaponized against us. Everybody right now is freaking out about the amount of sugar in their blood. What's your glycemic index going on?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, if you have the right amount of fat, you're going to be burning it all. So if you have huge energy in your blood system, that's where your immune system lives, is in your blood, because it goes to every cell in your body 24 hours a day, every 60 seconds. So yeah, just getting those kind of things, just getting healthier and healthier and healthier. I think we are tapping into the fountain of youth. I always ask myself, and then I ask other people to ask themselves the question. I don't want them answering me. I would say, how much do you really care about keeping your body alive? And they say, oh, I care. Well, no, you're not answering me. You're answering yourself, because it depends on what you're willing to do to keep your body alive without chasing your tail all day long, but getting it simple. And that's a good question for all of us to ask ourselves.
Definitely.
Well, hey, it's been really, really great catching up with you and learning about your practice, learning about your life, how you got there. It's really wonderful. And I'm thankful for the work you're doing and for spending the time to share what you've learned and what you know today. And we'll definitely catch up again.
Yes.
You're always going to be learning, and we're all here to share what we've, like these golden nuggets. So if you had one thing to tell us that was, you feel your biggest golden nugget for everyone to get the greatest benefit for, what would that be?
Getting back to our morning routines, start a meditation practice. I've been playing with meditation since 1994. When I was in high school, I was one of those weirdos. And it has given me more clarity throughout the day. And I will say better brain power. And it helps me make healthier choices as well, because now my head is right before I do anything else.
All right. Well, that's pretty much a wrap for this time. So thank you again so much. And we'll catch up to you in the near future.
Sounds
great.
So
everyone, make it a great day and a great week ahead. And we'll catch up to all of you very soon.